What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode. And this week, I want to take a step outside of the usual property-focused conversation and look at something that's incredibly relevant to entrepreneurs and investors in today's world. I call it the attention economy. We're going to unpack the story of Elon Musk, not as the tech genius and the entrepreneur, but as a key person of influence who has become so influential, in fact, too influential for his own good. This is a story about visibility, power, polarization, and the impact that one individual can have on an entire business empire. So let's get into it. What do we call, what is the attention economy? We live in an era where attention is effectively currency. The more of it that you command, the more influence you hold. And that influence and that attention can sometimes come at a cost. In fact, it always comes at a cost. It's just whether you're willing to pay that cost. And that's certainly what we're seeing play out here with Elon Musk. My friend and a former guest on this very podcast is a guy called Daniel Priestley. Daniel appeared on episode 53 way back a couple of years ago now. But Daniel has a great book. It's up in my library behind my back here, and it's called The Key Person of Influence. And he talks about the importance of becoming that key person of influence in your industry. And to do this, you need to develop, he has a framework of 5 things that you need to develop. He calls them the 5 Ps. You need to develop your pitch. You need to develop you need to publish content, essentially. You need to build products that can be sold online. You need to raise your profile, and you need to create partnerships with other business people or other influencers. Now, after reading his book in 2019, I joined his KPI accelerator, and this was actually based in London, and I used to fly over once a month for meetings with Daniel and a bunch of other people that wanted to do this as well. And it was really, what would I say, like it was a determining move in my business and in my career. Once I learned the various strategies that he teaches and took some of his advice and applied the program framework. One of the reasons why I started this podcast was actually following being a member of his accelerator. And growing my Instagram and my TikTok, that has also created huge interest in my accelerator program. So all of these things, having just a profile, can be massively influential and massively beneficial to your business. There's no question about that. Now, I actually teach some of these strategies in my own accelerator, and I do that because if you are, let's say you're growing your business or you're trying to grow your real estate portfolio, what you need to do almost always is go out there and raise money from investors. And it can help in terms of your credibility and in terms of your ability to get in front of certain people if you have somewhat of a profile or influence, because it's seen as a currency. And so I help people in my program to actually develop those tools and stuff. And it does help build a bit of trust and a bit of credibility in the eyes of customers and potential partners. Now, Elon Musk, he has done this masterfully. He fronts not just one, but $6 billion, multi-billion dollar companies. And until recently, in fact, he is currently the richest man on the planet. And he eclipses everybody else on that list by over 100 billion. Mark Zuckerberg is currently in second place at something like 230 billion, but Elon Musk is up there at 350 billion, and I believe he used to be at 450 billion. So he's lost a lot of wealth in the last while as a result of this backlash that we're talking about here today. So here's the question. What happens when the influence that you've built becomes a liability? And to understand the huge backlash that we're seeing against Tesla, we have to go back and we have to look at the rise of Tesla and Elon Musk's, essentially his metamorphosis from a tech guy into this polarizing political figure. So Tesla began out as a high-end niche automobile product. If you go back to 2008, they released the Roadster. Now, the Roadster was a little two-seater electric car. And I remember Tim Ferriss talking about it. I think he either built one or bought one, or he was driving it, and he was talking about the incredible acceleration of a car that can do 0 to 60 in 2 seconds or something like that. But the reality is it was a niche product, and only 2,500 people bought the car. Very few people would have predicted that Tesla would have turned into this mega company based off of that beginning. It wasn't until about 4 years later when, in 2012, they launched the Model S. Now, the Model S is the car that you see driving around. When I was actually in Amsterdam a while back, and I can remember just noticing that every single taxi that I saw was a white Tesla Model S. And so it is interesting. One of the sort of things that they say about the Model S is that it was effectively an iPhone on wheels. When you climbed into it, you just, there's a huge screen in front of you and everything like that. Then the Model 3 came out 5 years later, and the Model 3 was their mass production car. And then soon after that came the Model Y. And these two cars, the 3 and the Y, they took Tesla into the mass market, and it catapulted the company to global dominance and prominence in terms of the electric market. But the biggest game changer in the whole Tesla story was actually entering the Chinese market. No car manufacturers up until that point had been allowed to have ownership of the factories. They were allowed to be partners with a local Chinese partner, but they weren't allowed to have full ownership. And that changed. In 2020, Tesla became the first foreign car company to fully own its entire local plant in Shanghai. And soon after that, profits absolutely soared. But now things are unraveling. And I was listening to a Forbes conversation on Forbes recently at the magazine, and a man called Alan Unsman, he has been following Elon Musk. He's a journalist following Elon Musk since 2006. And he explained that as he looks back on his memory of the early days, he does not remember Elon Musk having any political opinion about anything at all. He was completely apolitical. But something changed on his journey. And today he is deeply political. He's working, as everyone knows, he's working closely with President Donald Trump. And he has reportedly donated over $300 million to Donald Trump's election campaign. And now he's involved in, the policy. He's involved in cabinet meetings. Even though he's not a cabinet member, he's in the room with them, as we can see on television. And he is spearheading what has been called the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. And that obviously is it's a link to the meme coin, the Doge coin that came out some time back. And this is where things all start to go wrong for Elon Musk. I mean, he just decided, I'm going to fully get behind Donald Trump. And that political pivot was a major turning point for him, because if you look at the Tesla customer base, it tends to lean towards progressive people, because people are thinking about climate change and they want to drive an e-vehicle because of its climate credentials. It's clean energy and all this kind of stuff. And so when Elon Musk turned to the hard right, suddenly all of the customers that were buying Teslas and stuff, they felt betrayed. In California, California is Tesla's home market. It's where the company started. Sales have dropped over 30% since this January. And despite the fact that its sales dropped 30% in its home market, the EV market in general grew during that same time. In Europe, it's far worse. Tesla sales are now down over 40% across Europe, whilst all of the other EV manufacturers have continued to see growth. And so it's really obvious that something is damaging Tesla, but it's not damaging electric vehicles in general. I believe in the case of Germany, probably that's the biggest fall, and that is because Elon Musk came out in favor of one particular political party. And of course, it was on the hard right side of things. And so a lot of Germans have turned against him. And then he did the same in the UK, got involved in the UK politics. And so all of this has basically pushed to a big backlash against Tesla because it is so closely associated with Elon Musk. Now, people would say, oh, but hold on a second. Whilst he's really unpopular with the progressives and the lefties, on the right, he's going to be super popular now because he's seen as this hero and this, real hard MAGA person. But the problem is that's all fine and well. Republicans might love him, Trump supporters might love him. But here's the rub. They don't buy Teslas. They love big gas guzzlers, the big Ford and the big Chevrolets and all that, like the huge big Jeeps that have like 6-liter engines. That's what Republicans tend to buy. And so when you see him alienating his customer, he's not replacing the customer with the other guy. He's just losing his customers. And so it's a major thing. Now, it's not just isolated to Elon Musk and his politics. It is also at the same time that this is all going on, Tesla's product line, we'll say, the models, they have stagnated. Okay, the Model 3 is now a 7-year-old car since it came out. There hasn't been any facelift or anything like that. Obviously, we've had the Cybertruck, but the Cybertruck was released in 2023, and it is expensive, and it is, again, very niche. Like, a lot of people just wouldn't want to touch it because it looks the way it looks and all that kind of stuff. Now, in the same time span, Chinese competitors, particularly BYD, but also there's ones called NIO and Xiaomi or Xiaomi. I can't even pronounce that. They are pumping out innovative and much, much cheaper models. If you have a look at the models that BYD have got coming out, they're as good, if not better in some areas than the Tesla, but they're 30% cheaper in some cases. And so despite the fact that Tesla had this first mover advantage, it seems to have completely squandered that advantage. Why is that? Well, obviously his politics is very much a part of it and losing all of that. But his politics have nothing to do with the fact that Chinese companies came along and have kind of leapfrogged them in terms of technology and stuff. What that is most likely down to is the fact that he is a highly distracted person today. If you were running Tesla as a company, that is like a massive undertaking for any one individual. And he does that along with 5 other billion-dollar companies. He has SpaceX, putting rockets into space, and he does that as well. He has Twitter. He has the Boring Company, which is about boring tunnels and all sorts of stuff. I mean, just imagine trying to spin all those plates, juggle all those balls. It's too much for one person. And when something like a Chinese competitor comes along and brings out a better car than you, and you're like, oh, I'm very busy over here running the Department of Governmental Efficiency, you just don't have the concentration. And so that is what's happening. And so trying to do that all simultaneously, I think, is the biggest problem. And that is a major, major issue for Elon Musk. All right, so let's talk about influence as risk. And if you tie this back to Daniel Priestley's book, Key Person of Influence, and the framework that he has in there, the 5 Ps that I mentioned already, I think it's important to note that building a personal brand and having influence is a good thing. And if you look at the vast majority of CEOs that run successful companies, most of them will have a bigger following than the company itself does. And to have a look at Tim Cook, for example. Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, he wouldn't be a high profile person. You wouldn't have him making these kind of big statements that are out there and very controversial and stuff. And yet he has 14 million people following him on Twitter. And if you look at Apple on Twitter, Apple has only 9 million followers. And so he's got nearly 50% more followers than his company, even though the company has been around for much longer and obviously, is the item that people buy. Look at Ronaldo, the Cristiano Ronaldo, the footballer. He's one of the biggest sort of influencers on the planet these days. On Instagram, Ronaldo has 651 million followers. It's just incredible. And if you add up, everyone everyone that's in the world of football, that's interested in football, clubs and all that, they would follow their favorite club, we'll say. So Ronaldo, whilst he has 651 million followers, all of the 10 clubs, the top 10 clubs in the world, would not even add up to that amount of followers. I think the top club is Real Madrid with something like 170 million followers, and he has 650. So that just gives you an idea. So people tend to follow the personality rather than the corporate entity. And so being a key person of influence, being a KPI, means that it's your face, your voice, and your values that become embedded in the brand or the brands that you've built. And then when this is done right, it builds immense loyalty and market power. But it also means, and this is the risk, is that if you make any personal missteps, that it can have a liability or an impact, a negative impact on the company. In Elon Musk's case, his polarizing behavior has, his political allegiances and his alliances, and his part-time focus on all of the different things, like 6 companies. This has created an existential risk for Tesla, and I think, not to put too fine a point on it, I think that we could be looking at the BlackBerry moment for Tesla at the moment. If you go back to 2000 and I can't remember, was it 2004, something like then, when Apple released the iPhone. And I can remember at the time I was using BlackBerry. BlackBerry was the most popular device. Prior to that, it was Nokia. And then I remember hearing the CEO of BlackBerry kind of laughing at, I think it was the CEO of BlackBerry, laughing at the iPhone and just sort of saying, like, who's going to use a phone that doesn't even have a keyboard, scoffing at it. Fast forward, it's gone. So what are the risks for Tesla right now? I think it's in a sort of similar position right now with all of the hate that it's getting. So the brand identity is confused. If you're buying a Tesla car, are you buying it because you want to be good to the climate and you want to have a low emission car? That's your identity. But are you also now identifying as somebody who thinks Elon Musk is a great guy? And that's the risk. So he has alienated the core customer. There's a lack of innovation in the product line, and I mentioned that already. But there's also then this whole leadership bottleneck. Like, Elon is he's so in charge of the company that he doesn't even have a chief operating officer. He doesn't have like a load of people below him in the same way as Apple would. If you look at Tim Cook has got this, they bring out at every, Apple sort of, when they're bringing out all the latest technology and stuff, Tim Cook might introduce, the latest product, but almost always he's bringing in this huge big stable of people below him that are his underlings, and they all explain features and stuff. You don't see anything like that in Tesla. It's all about Elon. Elon wants the limelight. And so a distracted CEO wearing too many hats, it's a major, major risk for the brand. Now in China, Elon himself is actually still popular. He's popular because of the whole grind culture and the fact that he's a successful entrepreneur. But even having said that, Tesla is losing market share because of the brutal competition that they bring out in China. And so It's a really difficult time. I think certainly I can understand he's announced recently that he'll be leaving the Doge position, and he's trying to say that it was only ever going to be for 130 days, that's all he was there for. I'm not so sure I believe all that. I think he suddenly realizes the damage that's been done here. So what can we learn? What are the lessons? To finish this off, first thing we need to think about is as business owners, as investors, if you have a personal brand, what are the takeaways from this? First of all, your attention must be aligned with purpose. You have to be clear. If you want to be loud about the right things. Be careful that you are serving your audience and your brand from the positions that you take. If you decide to go and take a really controversial position, you might get loads of airtime, but it's not necessarily going to be good for your brand or your company or whatever. Number two, politics is effectively poison when it comes to consumer brands. You should stay focused on your mission. If you take sides when it's a political football, when it's any kind of a controversial position, you take sides, you risk alienating half of the market that supports your position or doesn't support your position. You need to systemize your leadership, obviously. I mentioned just the fact that he's spread so thin across these 6 giant companies. If you're building a scalable business, you need depth of management. You don't just want to have this one charismatic figurehead, because if anything happens to that guy, then everything falls. And so not having a chief operating guy, not having a succession plan, it's kind of a house of cards that he's built up there. And so the other thing is don't mistake charisma for strategy. Spotlight, if you're going to put a spotlight on your company, you want to make sure it's for the right reason. You're not going to build your company because of the spotlight that you bring on it from raising controversial topics and stuff. If you want to build a company, it takes discipline, focus, and consistency around those two things. And ultimately, you got to protect your customer base. You got to know who they are, and then you got to know what it is that they care about, and do not take their loyalty or their loyalty for granted. And it's funny, again, bringing up the whole BlackBerry thing. BlackBerry, Nokia before that. I had Nokias when I was, teenager, or not a teenager, but when mobile phones became a thing. I remember the Nokia and the Motorola were the two big names. And then all of a sudden the BlackBerry was cool. And then all of a sudden it wasn't. And BlackBerry was the most successful company at the time. And then a year or two later, it's gone. So my final thoughts, I've been following Elon for 10 to 15 years. And it's really difficult to kind of position what you think about a guy that is from an engineering point of view and from a kind of technical point of view, he's like a genius. There's absolutely no doubt in my eye. No doubt for me that he is a kind of a genius and an engineer, virtuoso, we'll say. But at some point, he seems to have become so obsessed with being in the public eye and having this attention that he's just kind of lost the run of himself. And it seems to be more about controversy and saying things that will get, a lot of clicks. And I even heard something crazy that when he bought Twitter, that the Super Bowl was on. And during the Super Bowl, he put out a tweet and Joe Biden put out a tweet. And so Elon Musk on one side and Joe Biden on the other side. And Joe Biden's tweet got more likes or more views or whatever than Elon's did. And Elon, owning the company, did not like this. And so he went back to the headquarters and he told them that he wanted them to rewrite the algorithm so that he would actually get an unnatural boost for his particular viewpoint. And so when he posts now, he gets something like 1,000 or 10,000 times the amount of views that any other person on the platform would, regardless of what he posts. That is a guy that is obsessed with his opinion being heard. And when you get so obsessed with that kind of thing, I just think you've lost you've taken your eye off the ball. You no longer really know what you're doing in terms of clarity around your mission. I saw during the weekend that he sold Twitter to his AI company, and that's going to be interesting. A lot of people, a lot of the Elon tech bros will all be saying, look, we told you he would, he did it all for a strategic reason, and that he did it all in order to train his AI. I'm not so sure. I think that's an internal transaction. He can pay whatever he wants from one company to another company, and then he can kind of put it down as being a great day for the business. But I'm not so sure. It just shows the cost of training data these days for AI. But the story, what it has shown us, is that even the most powerful brands, they can implode when the founder's influence overshadows the product itself. And we are currently watching this play out in real time. And what happens when a key person of influence oversteps, goes too far, goes off brand essentially, and could he take the company down with him? This remains to be seen. He is talking about stepping down from his position in Doge, and frankly, I don't think that is. I think it's maybe a little bit too late. We shall have to see whether he can reverse the damage that he's done. Is the damage repairable? That's the big question, and we'll I guess time will tell. But personally, I think this could be considered the BlackBerry moment for Tesla. I hear like that their showrooms are getting firebombed now, and people are putting stickers saying this is a Toyota on the back of Teslas. Like, that is pretty poisonous for any brand. So whether you're building a business, leading a community, or just growing your profile, remember this: attention is power, but without strategy, attention can be a ticking time bomb. Guys, I hope you found this one useful. If you want to learn more about my program, I actually do teach people how to build a profile if that's of interest. Not everyone wants to do that, but I do think it does have value provided it's done right. Until next time, stay focused, stay resilient, and keep on building. Speak soon.